Hey friends, welcome to the channel. My name is Manasseh and I'm a nurse practicing here in the United States. And I mean, like they call it, I'm a USRN, okay? So it's always a pleasure to come your way, and I want to say a big thank you to all of you who keep watching these videos and have kept faith with the channel. I just wish to say that you guys have been more consistent than me, and even though someone will say it's for good reason because I've had to move country and sometimes having to settle into another country can be a bit of a pain. I mean, it can actually be a pain, not a bit of a pain. It is still not a good excuse. I have to be more consistent, and so it's a promise that I'm going to be more consistent in churning out good videos that are of value to even if one person. I think that I'll be achieving a good aim, but the key is to be consistent and keep posting these videos. So over the past couple of months, I've had nearly a dozen people reach out to me, and one question has stood out. Manny, how have you been able to migrate from the UK to the US in such a brief period of time? I've had to work in 3 countries as a nurse. So I worked in Ghana for 8 years, which is my home country. Then I moved to the UK at the latter part of 2021, and then it's 2023 and I'm here in the US. So most people feel like I've had this process done in a rather quick period of time. The process of migrating to the US is anything but brief. It is not overnight. I mean, submit a ton of paperwork to be eligible to migrate to the US as a legal resident and practice as a nurse. Okay, so this video is just my way of answering all the questions that you guys have asked. And let me issue a disclaimer that I'm no immigration expert, so I'm not able to answer questions about your processes and the challenges you may be having with the National Visa Center. I wish I could, but I can't help in that regard because I'm no expert in that field. However, the scope of this video is to help the people who want to understand what the migration process was like for me and what are some landmines that we'll have to be wary of, and how it's going to help their journey or their quest to also migrate to the US as registered nurses or become USRNs. This is essentially the kind of video I wish I had at the beginning of my process, because it would have cut a lot of the guesswork to a large extent. It would have brought more clarity and simplicity to my processes, and overall it would have made me appreciate the journey better and know which states I need to go, the various nuances associated with all the 52 states which are independent and have all their unique processes that you need to meet, and a ton of boxes that you need to tick to be allowed to migrate successfully to the US. So I hope this video is of value to someone, and if you know someone who's going to benefit from this video, please be sure to share the video to the people or to the person. I'm sure it would have helped in a way. Okay, so after the long introduction, let's get into the steps that you need to take. So the first step you need to take is decide which state board you want to register with. Go to their website and read about the requirements. It's going to make a ton of difference and make you better appreciate the requirements of these states as regards to the registration process for international nurses. Additionally, it's going to help you yourself understand and know what the state requires. Please just be a good student or be studious with this one and take time and read and understand it. If after that you have clarification, then of course you can reach out to people who have gone through the process. Your advantage of having read through the document on the state website, you are able to better understand the process. It is crucial, guys, so don't skip this process at all. Okay, and then you are ready to progress to the next step. Now the next process is opening the CGFNS or ERES or Joseph Silney and Associates account. Now the thing is that once you are an internationally educated nurse, you are going to have your credentials evaluated by a certified body in the US. Now these credential evaluation bodies ensure that your training and your certification in whichever country you are coming from meets the lofty standards of the US, which is why there are these organizations, and there are a number of them, but the most common ones that are used by many people for their credential evaluation services is the ones I've mentioned. So the CGFNS, which is the one I used, then there is ERES, and then there is Joseph Silney and Associates as well. Now the thing you need to do is to open an account with any of these ones and then purchase the Credential Evaluation Services form. Now this Credential Evaluation Services form is what you are going to send one to your educational institution, and then you send another copy to the Nursing Regulation Authority in your country. So if you are from the UK, you are going to send one to the UK NMC, and then you send the other one to, let's say if you went to University of Southampton or University of London, you're going to send that to them. If you are from Ghana, you're going to send it to the NMC, and then to, let's say you went to Koforidua Nurses Training College, you're going to do same. Now what is key to realize is that at this stage, once you send this document to these institutions, you are literally not involved in any part of the process again. The institutions have to fill out the required information in the credential evaluation forms as requested by the credentialing body, and make sure that they fill it out correctly, and then send the documents back to the credential evaluations body in the United States. Now, at this point, you can only hope that these institutions in your home country will do the right thing and fill out the information as accurately as possible, because the least sign of contradiction or inconsistency in your document will lead to an outright rejection by the credentialing body, either the CGFNS or the ERES, or whichever one, because this is a test, or this is like a check to ensure that the person who is being recruited or registered to practice as a USRN is actually a trained professional and it's not a fraud. So you can just pray and hope that the right thing is done, which I believe most of those regulatory agencies do that. And even if it's not the case and there are errors, you still have the chance to make corrections. Okay, so the thing is that you are not involved. The document does not have to come from you. Once the institution fills it out, they have to send it themselves. If you happen to send them with your address and all of that, the CGFNS or whichever body you choose will reject those documentation. So try and keep that in mind. Now, and at this stage, allow regulatory bodies in your home country and your educational institution to do their work, and I believe that you're going to have a smooth process. Now, after the credentialing body has received the document from your home country, the regulatory body and your educational institution where you trained, they'll peruse the document, and if it meets the standard of the US, they'll give the go-ahead for your chosen state board of nursing to issue you the famous ATT, or the authorization to test, which allows you to register for the NCLEX exams and take the test. If they are not convinced with the kind of training you have, they have methods or mechanisms in place to have you either do some of the courses or present further documentation that proves that you had those trainings, or they may even go as far as requesting the curriculum from the educational or training institution that you attended to, just to be sure that you had those courses done. So it can be a bit of a back and forth, but if you're fortunate enough to come from a country that has standardized education systems which is at par with the US systems, this process should not really be a problem for you. Now, the process of having your credentials evaluated and being issued with the authorization to test, or the ATT, can be a lengthy process. I mean, the last time I checked, it could be anything between 5 to 12 months, and it can be a long and boring wait. But it can only be long and boring if you sit down and do nothing. But if you invest the time into preparing for the NCLEX, is going to be the best thing that you have done. Which brings me to the third point: you need to prepare for the NCLEX exams. And I can tell you that the NCLEX is probably the most difficult or the hardest exams you will ever take as a nurse anywhere in the world. And I'm speaking from the benefits of having taken the exams in 3 different countries, in Ghana and then the UK and the NCLEX itself. And I can tell you that it is no joke. The NCLEX is not simply a task of memorizing questions from a question bank and pouring it out on test day. It's far from that. Of course, that is a key component of that, but it is the exam itself has many other components that is not just about memorizing. It is about reorienting your thinking patterns about new ways of doing things, and it involves complex processes like risk analysis, prioritization of patient care, among other things. I mean, complex concepts and so on and so forth, which is why you need to realign your thinking or reorient yourself to what you've been used to the new ways of doing things in the US. I mean, the questions are not linear in nature, and so are the answers. It's just not what you normally expect. For example, there was a question about a patient who had suffered a stroke, and the patient was being assessed, and the question was asking you to choose which of these things was like the main problem with the patient, okay, or the priority problem. One of the options was difficulty in swallowing, and then the other option was risk for aspiration. So most people would say that the answer is risk for aspiration, and if you chose risk for aspiration, you are wrong, because even though risk for aspiration, or even though aspiration is such a big deal, it is just a risk, okay, but the actual answer is that the patient has difficulty in swallowing and that they could choke. So that is an actual problem, and so the NCLEX requires you to choose actual problems over potential problems. So those are some of the challenges that you go through as you embark on this journey. So the NCLEX text is more about having to unlearn the things you are used to and relearn new ways of doing things, which is why it's a bit difficult for people who have practiced in other countries for a long period of time to pass the NCLEX, as opposed to a fresh candidate whose concept of nursing is blank and they have the chance to learn new things. I mean, for the fresh candidate, their understanding is what the psychologists like to call a tabula rasa. They have no innate understanding or no muscle memory built over concepts, so they have a chance to learn new things. But for the experienced nurse, you have to unlearn and relearn new ways of doing things. And I realized that those who go on to succeed, passing the NCLEX and practicing successfully in the US, are those whose pace of learning is fluid and fast. So if you want to succeed in this journey and pass the NCLEX, you can use some materials and reorient your minds to doing things in a quicker fashion, just like in the US. Now, you can use materials like Archer Review, Rema, Kaplan, UWorld, and a whole lot. And some of these materials are very good. Now, the truth is that if you use these materials judiciously, you will have the chance of passing the NCLEX just like a native test taker or someone who was schooled in the US. Of course, you need to use these materials judiciously and bury yourselves in them. And if you do that, in addition to liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing this video, you would have increased your chances of passing the NCLEX exams. Okay, so these materials, UWorld and the rest, like I've stated, are going to help you pass the exams more easily. And that leads me to the next point: prepare for the IELTS test. Now, so after passing the NCLEX test, the next stage is to take the IELTS test. Now, the IELTS is simply the International English Language Testing Systems, and I think that you are able to take to prove your English proficiency. But the most popular one I know about is the IELTS test. Now, the thing is that if you manage to pass the NCLEX exams, the IELTS test shouldn't be too much of a problem. And don't get me wrong, the IELTS test in itself can be challenging. I've heard stories of people who decided to take the NCLEX test because they couldn't pass the IELTS test and meet the requirements that they needed to practice as a nurse in the UK. So they decided to take the NCLEX and write the IELTS test for the US because apparently the US has a lower requirement for the English language test. And it does make sense because English proficiency is not necessarily a test of intelligence or competence in nursing. I know Spanish people and some other nationalities struggle with English language, but they are pros. They are very competent when it comes to their nursing jobs or their nursing professions. So at this stage, you need to take the IELTS test, and I can tell you that the IELTS test is quite challenging, but it's doable. Now, I've taken the IELTS test, and having achieved a nearly perfect score of 8.5 in some of the challenging components like reading, I think that I have realized that testing or practicing prior to taking the test is key, and practicing under exam conditions is the single most important act that will move the needle in your favor during the testing period if you do so judiciously while practicing at home. So for example, if on test day you know that the reading component is going to take 30 minutes, once you are practicing at home, practice in 30 minutes, under 30 minutes, not 31 minutes or not 30.5 minutes, exactly 30 minutes, because on test day it's 30 minutes, and if after 30 minutes you do not put down your pen after the examiner says stop work, it's a fail. So why would you practice under different conditions or expect to pass under different conditions on exam day? Like when you watch footballers and trainers, they have practiced one skill several times. Like LeBron James is said to be making like 1,000 throws or 1,000 attempts at making a good throw, and so when they get onto the pitch, it's just one of those practices. And it's the same for the IELTS test. If you do a lot of listenings, one in the morning, one in the evening, for a period of time, about a month or so, you should be ready to ace all those exams. And a website like the British Council website or IELTSonlinetest.com are some of the very useful websites that I have used during the process, and they've been invaluable in helping me pass the exams. They are simply indispensable if you want to have a good chance at acing the exams once and for all. So be sure to check them out. I have linked all those ones in the ebook, which is free and is linked below. Just download it and have a look at it, and I think you'll benefit a lot from that material. Now, this leads me to the last stage, which I believe is easily the most important. And I know at this point some people will say just get me into the US because it's not even important to do a lot of those checks, but I can tell you that at this stage there are some life-changing decisions that you need to take at this point. It is what makes the difference between enjoying your initial days in the US and having a meteoric rise on your career here, as against beginning to struggle and having to move states and all of that, wasting a lot of your time and money in the process. So at this stage you need to make some considerations. For instance, what are your career goals? Do you want to go to NP school and become a nursing practitioner, or do you want to go back to medical school, or do you want to be an MSN? It's essential that you get to learn all these things, and if you want to save yourself the stress of having to move states and do all those trips, then you need to know which states are autonomous for nurse practitioners, which I know most states are becoming autonomous now, or which states allow or require the supervision of a medical officer for you to be able to practice, and so on and so forth. Do you have preferences about the weather? Do you prefer sunny California to the wet and windy Washington on the West Coast, or do you have concerns about the ratio of blacks to whites in a particular state, or do you have preference for being on the East Coast, which is more humid, to being on the West Coast and be closer to Canada? All these things are concerns that people think about, and I think that if I had a lot of these ideas, I probably would have made different decisions, even though I enjoy the state I currently work in. But I think that information is key, and it helps you learn and know a lot of things. Maybe you have friends in some states and or family in some states, and you want to live in states closer to those states, not exactly in the same state, but maybe closer to them, or you want to move far away, and all those other considerations. There are several nuances to this whole process. So I think that at this stage you need to be sure to know what your requirements, what your goals and ambitions as a nurse are, and make the decisions based on those metrics that you have. Okay, and you also need to be sure that pay is not the only thing you are considering, because there are other things that are more important than pay, if not the same as important as just pay that you are getting per hour. Okay, so you need to make all those checks. For example, there are some states that give you high rates of pay, but they have high standards of living. Okay, so you might get a higher amount of pay, but you end up spending about 60% of your income in bills and taxes. And there are some states that give you a lower pay rate, but you're able to save about 70% after paying bills. So you need to check all these nuances and make a decision that is guided and informed, and not just based off of a single metric like how much you are earning or how much you are being offered as an hourly wage on paper. So in conclusion, I believe this video has been of help to you. I did indicate from the beginning that this video is not going to go into the details of everything. I've created a free ebook which I've linked in the description, and it's going to go into further detail on some concepts or some components of the process to help you understand it better, so that you can be able to check it out every time. So be sure to download it from the link in the description, which is free. And if you have any questions, be sure to send me an email to info@manasetete.com, and I'll be able to answer your questions or your emails from there. And I believe that this video has been of help to you. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, and I'll be sure to answer your questions if any. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.